What I've heard other coaches do when it comes to involving the boss in conversations and having conversations with the boss is different, sometimes to a small degree, sometimes to a larger degree from what I do. So what I want to do is share with you what it is I do so that you can tweak, if you want, how it is that you involve the boss of your client in conversations. Traditionally, it seems that there are two kinds of meetings with the boss. One meeting is between the boss and the coach, where the boss talks about their impressions of what the developmental needs are of their direct report, so that the coach has the boss's perspective, in addition to the perspective they get from their coaching client. The second kind of meeting is a conversation where the client, their boss, and the coach are all present. Before this meeting, the coach and the client design the conversation, and then the client leads that conversation once the three of them are together. The coach will at times get previous permission from their client to answer questions that the boss asks the coach about how the client is progressing in the coach meetings. I also have two kinds of meetings, one with the boss beforehand and one with the three of us together. However, I'm working a couple of principles in those meetings that maximize the impact they can have, both on the boss and on my client. Those principles are: tie coaching development to performance, and strengthen the relationship between the boss and their direct report, so there is more frank and robust performance and support conversations between them. Development work during coaching sessions leads to performance or not. In other words, we shouldn't leave it to chance. And the boss is a gold mine for identifying what performance standards your client needs to attain, though the boss may need some help articulating that key information. I see these three-way conversations as our coaching contribution to link up our client's development work to the leadership and performance expectations of the system. Not that we give the boss information about how our client is doing, but helping the boss have conversations with their direct report about what performance expectations could best use development work. Conversations with the boss happen during every phase of the coaching. Phase 1, contracting and discovery. Phase 2, implementation, and Phase 3, evaluation. The boss is in the discovery phase. There's a midpoint check during the implementation phase with the boss, and then there's a final check-in with the boss during the evaluation phase. During the time frame when I'm meeting with my client to begin the goal setting in Phase 1, I meet one-to-one with the boss about what the boss expects from my client. Then I have a three-way conversation with the boss, their direct report, my client, and myself. So I'm having plan and prep sessions with both the boss and my client to get them ready for our three-way conversation early in the coaching contract. I help the boss to be clear with the client about what the boss expects the client to work on that is directly related to performance expectations. I explain to the boss that it is critically important that their direct report and I, as their coach, hear these expectations simultaneously in the same meeting, so we're both hearing the same version of what is on the boss's mind. There's not going to be any game of telephone afterwards where I got one version in my one-to-one with the boss and my client got a different version in their one-to-one with their boss, and we're left in the dark about which is the definitive version. Now, because coaches have great curiosity and listening skills, I'm asking questions about the boss's expectations and getting crystal clear specifics from them on what those expectations look like when they are played out through behavior. In fact, the boss may never have been as clear themselves before about what they really wanted more from their direct report. And because some of it might be hard feedback to give their direct report, they may not have ever quite said it this way to them. So I've learned to ask the boss toward the end of the session with them two questions. Okay, now, you've said a lot. First of all, is any of this confidential, meaning your direct report doesn't know and you can't tell them? I actually had a boss say, well, actually, our whole division is going to be sold off to a completely different company, and I'm not at the liberty yet to tell my team, so yes, that's confidential. Okay, then. I'm really glad to know that, so that when we're in the three-way conversation, I don't inadvertently share information that actually is not common knowledge with the team member. So it's really good to know that. And then once I know that, then I ask the leader, well, okay, aside from the confidential information, that you've said is definitely off the table. If you forget to mention the other material, your expectations or your feedback or your evaluation, can I remind you in the session? 99% of the time they say, of course, sure. What I'm doing with that question is getting a contract to remind them to mention the harder stuff. In other words, bring up the performance stuff that you told me but that you haven't been completely straight with your employee before. With this second question, I'm increasing the chances that they will have a better, higher quality conversation, and their direct report will hear more real stuff that they can then work on. That means that development with your client becomes super targeted towards what your client now knows is the higher priority items coming from their boss. Your client leads these three-way conversations. They are still the first to say what they want to work on. This is what I have in mind, this is what I think you want from me, etc. And then the boss responds to that and includes their expectations and feedback and evaluations to date to get their employee, your client, current with how the boss's assessment of their direct report is related to performance and development expectations. Given this way of preparing for conversations with the client and the boss, I now have two wildcards in my back pocket. One is that I have permission from the boss and I have permission from the client to remind either and both of them that if they forget something that I think is really crucial that they tell each other, that I have permission to remind them. So my role is to remind them of what they haven't said, which is usually what's harder for them to say to the other person. In other words, I'm the fallback position to remind them to say what they would usually keep to themselves. Secondly, my role is to help the conversation be as clear as possible. They both have given me permission to help with ensuring that what they each actually say lands reliably in the hearer. So if I think one of them needs to paraphrase to make sure they understand what the speaker really intended, or if someone needs to give an example, then I suggest those in the middle of the conversation. Now they are having a clearer, heartier, more thorough conversation with each other, sometimes than they've ever had before. I've had clients literally tell me right after the meeting that we've just walked out of with their boss, that was the clearest their boss has ever been with telling them expectations that they have of them, which is great because now I'm confident that the work beforehand with the boss in conversations one-on-one and with the client, and then together in this three-way conversation, that what we are now really focused on working together, the client and I, is going to be really performance-based. It's going to be exactly around the expectations that they need to achieve. So they know that they're in the sweet spot.